So this is the second question. What considerations might offset arguments in favor of behaving ethically in space? So basically, this is a very good question. In a sense, what we are asking here, what the question is asking here is that is there any incentive? Is there any incentive for countries to not abide by, by rules and by regulations or by treaties uh, when it comes to being in space, right? Uh, or is there not to say incentive? Uh, is there need for countries to behave badly? Is it advantageous for countries to behave badly once they're in space, right? I think there are several ways to sort of address this question. The first one is to look at the history of human space exploration. Um, Human space exploration throughout history has always been a mixture of competition and cooperation, right? So it is never purely competitive, but it is also never purely cooperative. There is always a interplay between the two, right? So I think it is unrealistic to expect, maybe unrealistic for now at least, to expect that in the future human space exploration will always be cooperative or will always be competitive, right? Possibly it will be a mixture, continue to be a mixture of part competition and part cooperation, right? Um, and perhaps that is for the better, in the sense that whenever human space exploration sort of swings too far to the competitive side, then somebody or it will then swing back to the cooperative side. If it swing too far in the cooperative side, then maybe it will swing back to the competitive side. So mm, maybe we should be open-minded and realize that new human space exploration will always be a mixture of competition and cooperation, so that we don't idealize human space exploration so much as if it is a purely altruistic or purely militaristic endeavor. There's always a mixture of the two, right? So that's the first point. The second point is if we accept that outer space is a province of all mankind, right? It belongs to everyone. Then we have to be wary of what is called the tragedy of the commons, right? Uh, in short, what it means is that this goes back to Aristotle, but then this notion was revived by economist Hardin, Hardin. Basically, it says that what is common to the greatest number gets the least amount of care, right? So if we accept outer space and everything within it is is something held in common, something that belongs to everyone, then it is not surprising you know if something belongs to everyone, then nobody will feel compelled to take care of it, right? Because it belongs to everyone, and everyone accepts that everybody else will do their part and not them, right? So the underlying assumption behind this tragedy of the commons is that you have short-term interest, short-term self-interest, pursuing limited resources. I think we have to realize that outer space, even though outer space is huge and is possibly infinite in extent, we have to ask ourselves whether we consider outer space as a limited resource or not, right? Because if it is a limited resource, then we should not sacrifice outer space to you know to gain short-term self-interest, or in the we should not sacrifice outer space merely to fulfill, merely to satisfy our short-term self-interest, right? Because that will lead to the tragedy of the commons, right? Basically, if something belongs to everyone, then nobody will take care of it, and everyone will pursue it uh, as if they are the only ones who uses it, right? Who uses the commons, right? And in the end, the commons will be exhausted. Okay, so what the tragedy of the commons tells us is that it is not advisable to optimize self-interest, short-term self-interest, because that will hinder, or that will not distract, but that will take away from, right? That will take away from um, everyone's interest in the long term. So what we have here is a balancing act between self interest and everyone's interest, between short term and long term. Preferably, we want to maximize the benefit for everyone in the long term, but our value system, our political system, our social system might not be designed to encourage people to preserve everyone's interests for the long run, right? Perhaps our political, economic, social system nowadays have been designed so that everyone races to maximize their own self-interest in the short term, right? So what this means is that when we talk about human space exploration, we have to uh, ask two things. One, do we foresee this human space exploration as a long-term project or as a short-term project, right? And this is why Carl Sagan, when he argued for human space exploration, he believes that um, if we are able to overcome our selfish short-term interests on Earth, only then we are only then we deserve to be a spacefaring species, right? Um, in the sense that um, the next one of the next great tests for mankind is whether or not we can set aside our short-term selfish interests and pool our resources to tackle long-term and, you know, collective interest, or general interest, right? That is the next test for humankind, right? The next great test for humankind. If we cannot do that, then we may end up destroying ourselves, right? uh, Warring each other, competing against each other, and then at the same time destroying the earth, right? So one way to think about this is to think of space exploration to be a kind of evolutionary test, in the sense that only species that can set aside their selfish short-term interests, only they deserve to, travel and settle amongst the stars, right? So space exploration as a kind of evolutionary filter, right? So maybe one of the reason why we have not heard from any other intelligent species so far, is because they did not pass that test, right? They were unable to overcome their selfish short-term interests, and then they end up destroying themselves. They construct a technology, and then they develop weapons out of the technology, and they destroy themselves. So perhaps that is one of the reason why we have not heard from anyone, because, apa, um, all intelligent species will eventually evolve towards self-destruction, right? Um, and perhaps humankind, uh, will will is on the same path as well, right? Whether or not we can overcome our short-term and selfish interests, I think that is in our hands lah, right? That is in our hands. Okay, maybe what we need is a kind of social contract for outer space, right? We need to decide um, what kind of regulatory framework that we will all abide to, right? Um, because human space operation is a long-term, intergenerational project, right? It's not something that can be done by a single country or by a single individual, right? So the nature of the task, i.e., of human exploration, requires us to cooperate and to set aside our short-term selfish interests. Okay, so that is that. The next question: who do you think, as an individual, that is worthy enough to represent humankind as a whole if an outsider decided to contact us? Okay, so this is a question about first contact scenarios. And I did not address this in my talk because this is a whole other issue, right? But let me just mention here that there is already a protocol, a post detection protocol that has been put forward that outlines what should be done if we receive signals or messages from extraterrestrial intelligence, right? And then so there's also already a protocol in place, right? That tells us what we should do if we have a positive signal from extraterrestrial intelligence, right? Um, if you are interested to see how these protocols would play out, I would recommend the film Contact, right, by Carl Sagan, right? Or you can read the novel, right? In that novel, it depicts the reaction by mankind as a species when they receive a signal or message from extraterrestrial intelligence. So I just want to show you. You see, so this is an example of what is called the reply protocol, right? And if you look here, um, right? Um, Number five, if a decision is made to send a message to extraterrestrial intelligence, it should be sent on behalf of all mankind rather than from individual states. Right? The content of such a message should reflect a careful concern for the broad interest and well-being of humanity, right? And should be made available to the public in advance of transmission. Right? So those are the things that sort of should be in place, or these are the things that guides the reply of messages to extraterrestrial intelligence. And here, consultation on whether a message should be sent and its content should take place within the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space on the Nation. So uh, the United Nations has a committee which sort of arranges all this, right? So it will be unlikely that the reply would be composed by just one country or by one individual, right? It will probably the result of consultation among many countries, right? So I hope that answers your question. For this one here, it's not so much one individual, but many individuals sort of deciding amongst themselves what should we reply, right? So then the next question here, if the Earth was set to doom and we can't migrate everyone out from Earth, how do we pick who's living and who won't with limited space and resource? How are other living things and like animal? So this is a good question as well. Who gets to go and who gets to stay, or who gets to leave and who gets to stay, right? I think what we should realize is that mankind has caused extinctions of other species throughout history. We do not have to wait for an asteroid impact to think about, oh, which animal should we save, which plant should we save, which animal should we leave behind. Every day, mankind is causing extinction of animals and plants, right? I think that is a much more uh, pressing issue. And most of the public don't care anyway about the destruction of the environment, about extinction of species, right? That happens daily, right? So rather than worrying about who's leaving, who's leaving and who's not, I think we should think about how we are treating our environment now, right? And whether what steps are we taking to ensure that we are not causing destruction, causing the extinction of animals and plants, because this is what we can control now, right? uh, so we should focus our efforts there, right? This is an example of how lots of the issues in space ethics have analog with issues in environmental ethics, right? Because you can imagine outer space like the next frontier, opening, going into outer space is like going into an uncharted forest or an uncharted area, right? And developing or colonizing outer space is very much like uh, developing or colonizing a new continent or a new area, right? So there are analogies that can be drawn between environmental ethics and space ethics, especially how we have a duty to preserve uh, uh, the environment, right? Whether it be on Earth or in outer space, right? So yeah, so that's my answer lah, right? Rather than thinking about, okay, there's an asteroid coming, and then, oh, who should we save, who should we not save? I think we can we should think about the destruction we are causing to animal and plant life here on Earth, and ask ourselves, why aren't we doing more to protect them, right? And how does our lifestyle is contributing to the destruction of the environment, right? Because this is the last resort, right? Leaving space simply because we want to avoid, being destroyed. This is the last resort, but and possibly this kind of uh, calamity or destruction only occurs, once in 1,000 years, once in 10,000 years, right? But the destruction of animal life, of plant life, here on Earth happens on a daily basis, right? So before we think about who to save, who not to save, maybe we should direct our attention to how to preserve animals and plants that we have here on Earth, right? Um, and if we are forced to choose, right, then in environmental ethics, there are two major paradigms, at least, to think about um, who should we save and who should we not save. One is to use a paradigm of anthropocentrism, i.e., we should save animals and plants that are valuable to us as human beings, right? That is necessary for our survival, right? So everything is valued according to how important it is to us as human beings. So that's the first paradigm. But there's also a second paradigm, which is called the biocentric biocentrism, right? In which the value of something, the value of animals or plants, is not measured based on how useful it is to mankind, but how useful it is to the environment as a whole. Because not all animals and plants are valuable for us. For instance, do you want to save the mosquitoes, for instance, right? If some people might might think, well, it's, we do not need to take the mosquitoes with us because they only suck our blood, right? But from a biocentric point of view, we might argue that, well, the mosquito is very important for the ecosystem, right? Therefore, even though the mosquito can bring harm to us, but it is positive. It has its role in the environment, in the ecology. Therefore, we should not limit the kinds of animals and plants that we can save simply based on whether or not it is useful to us as human beings, right? So that is the answer, right? Okay. The next one, it's about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. About what if we were to discover a superior form of life elsewhere? Does that does that nullify the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? I think we have to think, what do we mean by superior when it comes to living beings, right? Superior means superior technology, or superior intelligence, or superior, in terms of physical prowess, or superior in terms of uh, emotional abilities, right? um, an analogy can be drawn here from animal rights, right? Why should we grant animal their rights, right? Um, is it because animals can think, or is it because they can feel, or they have sentience, or is it because they can suffer, right? As far as animal rights is concerned, it is enough for animals to have sentience, to be able to feel, for them to be granted rights, right? I mean, even though we are uncertain whether animals have intelligence or not, but it is enough that animals can suffer, can feel. That alone is enough justification to grant them their rights, and at the same time, it bestows upon us duties to protect them, right? So in the same case here, if there is life in outer space and this form of life is much more superior to us, right? In that case, they would see us as being inferior, right? And we should ask ourselves, if we, on what basis do we want to demand for our rights from them, right? Because from their point of view, right, they might think that, well, human beings are less intelligent, less powerful than us, therefore we should not be granted full rights as them, right? In which case we might disagree, right? We might say that, well, it is enough for us to have sentience, to be able to feel, uh, for us to be granted rights. So again, here there's a parallel, there's an analogy that can be drawn from environmental ethics, especially from animal rights, right? Uh, why should a superior alien being grants us rights? That question is very similar to, why should we as human beings grant animals their rights, right? uh, on what basis do we grant them those rights, right? Is it okay? So uh, um, that is my answer for this one. um, The last question: what do you think laws that need to be made to make sure that peace is free, that space is free without wars, as like those fictional movies? Um, the first point is that there are already treaties in place, right? The Outer Space Treaty have already provided with a foundation for space law, but not all countries have ratified the Outer Space Treaty, right? So it's not so much that there are no laws, but not many countries have chosen to acknowledge those laws and to abide by those laws, right? Um, a more concrete example would be, if we imagine human beings settling on the moon, for instance, they have their own lunar community, then what kind of uh, laws, what kind of constitution would they want to craft, right? Would they want to they want to put up, right? And there are many, well, not there are many, but I just want to share with you an example of an activity, right? In which this question was put forth. Moon constitution, how would a future lunar community be organized? This is an education activity that we do with school children, in which we ask them to think about what kind of laws do they want to have in place for human settlements on the moon, right? If we have a group of humans living on the moon, what kind of laws and they get to uh, uh, construct to enact their own laws, then what kind of laws do they want to have in place, right? So I would recommend that you look into this if you want to see, if you want to get some idea of the issues that are discussed, right? Um, so that is that, and finally, yeah, when we talk about the kind of rules and laws that we want to have in place, let's say in on the moon, for instance, or amongst a community of peoples on the moon, perhaps John Rawls's idea of the veil of ignorance is useful. What John Rawls proposed was that he proposed a thought experiment in which he says that, well, imagine we need to construct a constitution for a society, for a future society, and we do not know what we will be in that future society. We might be born as someone who is very rich. We might be born as someone who is very poor. We might be born as someone who's very weak. We might be born as someone who's very strong. We might be born as someone who's very powerful. We might be born into society as someone who has no power. So John Rawls invites us to imagine, if if we can, you know, if we do not know what we will be in that society, who we will be in that society, what kinds of laws do we want to have in place, right? Uh, and one of the one of the things that usually comes up from the thought experiment is that we want to have in place laws that protect the weakest, the poorest, the least powerful members of the society, and we want to have laws that do not uh, that tries to bridge the unequal economic um economic status, political status, social status within that society. I.e., we do not want a society in which the gap between the rich and the poor, the weak and the strong, the powerful and the least powerful to be so huge, right? Because according to Rawls, a society in which uh, a, a, a a bad society or morally bad society is not one in which there are many bad people, but a morally bad society is one in which the gap between the poor and the rich, the powerful and the least powerful, the influence, the the strong and the weak is the largest. So Rawls um, focuses our attention to the inequalities that exist in society. So it's not so much that you want to create a perfect society in which there is no poor people, there is no that everyone has the same political influence. But for Rawls, it is enough for us to aim for a society in which the inequality is made as small as possible or as minimum as possible, right? So that's the final question. So I hope my answers, you know, uh, the answers I've given, um, more or less satisfies uh, the the questions, right? And if you have further question, or if you would like to discuss this further, then feel free to contact me via email, right? The organizers have my email, and they can share them with you. So with that, I thank you very much.